Hey guys, welcome to another episode from UrbanCred podcast where we delve into the exciting world of urban living, lifestyle. And today we have a special episode with someone from Teak, New York. She is the owner of this remarkable retailer for curating, exquisite range of Scandinavian products and brands. And kind of just like UrbanCred, they have a very keen eye for design and really like a passion for quality. For this episode, we kind of diving into parallels between our companies, but also I want to talk about, design philosophies and really kind of the intricacies of curations for our brands. Without further ado, let's welcome Cait from Teak, New York.
Thank you.
So before we jump into it, tell me a little bit about you and, your brand.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, my name is Cait. I founded and am the CEO of Teak New York, which technically began in November of 2021, but that was just whenever I really came up with the idea, solidified it, registered my business, and then we officially launched in 2022. So you'll notice that there's established 22 on everything. But Teak New York is a Scandinavian furniture, home decor, lighting, gift shop. And so we kind of dabble in all points of just lifestyle in general, like home, but also lifestyle. I guess to get started, a little bit about me. As I mentioned, I'm the founder of Teak, but also I grew up in Pennsylvania. I have a love of nature, which I think is something that drove me to the Scandinavian people. I also have Swedish and Danish ancestry, so that was another tie for me starting Teak. But it was actually a pretty long journey that got me to this point in my life. Never thought that I would own a retail store or work in retail, especially whenever I was 18 and got my first job in retail. I thought, okay, well, this is what I'm going to do right now just to make some money. And then eventually later I'll have a career and do other things. But then I find myself back in retail.
It's a big circle. You can't escape it.
Yeah.
Cool. And then we spoke briefly, before this interview, and then you did mention you used to be part of the education system.
I did.
And then now you're back in retail, which is interesting.
Yes.
How did that I have a feeling that it has to do with, I went to college for this, and then I thought I wanted to do this, but then I actually wanted to do this.
Yes. I think as like a mid-30s person now, I've realized, especially being a millennial in general, that, we don't follow the paths of our parents, that like my parents have both had the same jobs for 30 years at this point where they have very minimal transition. I feel like my life has always been jumping from one thing to the next. So when I first, went to college, I wanted to be a high school art teacher. So art was always my passion, of course, which definitely ties into furniture and just home living. So I did go to college, got an art education degree. I was certified to teach K through 12, still am. But I have since, moved on from that career, mostly actually because in college, I had the opportunity to work at a Frank Lloyd Wright house called Falling Water. So I was actually a tour guide there for about 3 years. Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water house, which is the most famous house in the United States. It also has one of the largest collections of Frank Lloyd Wright furniture inside, because not only did Wright design the exterior architecture, but also all of the furniture. So I was immersed in this new environment where I just thought, well, I need I need a college job. This at least is in the art field. It's something unique, and I could drive to work and go to work in an architectural masterpiece every day. And I always see that as a pivotal moment in my life. Growing up in rural Pennsylvania, I grew up about an hour and a half outside of Pittsburgh. There was no architecture. There was no talk about furniture or home design. Like, we had a few really beautiful mansions in my town from like essentially old Pittsburgh money. And so that was just never something that I considered. And even going to Pittsburgh, it's not a place of architecture and design. It's not notable for that. So working at Falling Water was definitely the moment where my eyes were opened and I saw the possibility of, what would it look like to live in a place like this? And how would that impact my mindset and my senses? That was something I always loved to talk about when I was on tour with guests from all around the world, is saying, close your eyes, breathe in the air, listen to the sounds that you're hearing, and the smells of just being in the middle of, the forest. And that was always something that I would highlight whenever I would meet people and bring them into the space. So at this point, I had decided, well, I don't know if I want to become a high school teacher anymore. But then I also thought, well, I just got this degree, so maybe I should just try it out and see what I want to do. And I actually was a high school art teacher for 4 years. So I did that. And by my fourth year, I was like, okay, I've accomplished this dream. This was my dream whenever I was a teenager in college. I did it. So I started looking at different, graduate programs that would kind of open up my horizon from art education into maybe like business or the art world in general. And that's whenever I enrolled back in 2017 to Sotheby's Institute of Art in New York. So now I've been in New York for 6+ years. It'll be 7 years this coming year in 2024. And so that's kind of how my path led me here. But the Frank Lloyd Wright House was definitely like the moment I realized that I needed something more, and that I started focusing a little more on my interior. But of course, when you're in college, what do we buy? We just go to IKEA, Walmart, Target. Like that's all I had the money for. I was making, $7 an hour. That's still the minimum wage in Pennsylvania, by the way. But at the time, $7 an hour was okay. I made it through somehow. But yeah, so a lot has changed since then. And then I got my master's degree, worked in the furniture industry in New York for a couple of years, and then started Teak because I saw that there was a lack of stores that I wanted to buy from. So I thought, well, maybe we can bring some Scandinavian influence, which is another story as well of how I got to that point.
It's funny. You're mentioning like breathing in the air and just like listening to the sounds. And now you're in New York and then breathing in the fresh air of New York, hearing the awesome sounds of Hong Kong. You know what I mean? It's what a transition.
Yes.
Teak is, I think, compared to like a lot of like bigger stores out there, is like relatively new. I'm sure you're still trying to figure things out, as many new entrepreneurs are. And so then, like, how did the Teak idea of like come like, and then like and how did that link to Scandinavian? How does that work out?
So I had looked for grad schools that gave me the opportunity to study abroad, because in undergrad, I never really had that opportunity. And when you're, studying education in the United States, there's no reason to really, spend a semester abroad anywhere to learn about education. So that was something for me. I was like, well, I've never had the opportunity to do this. I'm now 27 years old. Like, I want to do a little more traveling. I had been to Europe, I think, just 3 times at this point. I had taken my students abroad whenever I was a teacher, because that traveling was always a passion of mine, just to see other places and to live like other people. But of course, that requires money too. So that was something that as a teacher, I didn't really have. So when I went to Sotheby's, we had one semester available in London, and I took that opportunity. And when I was in London, I had decided, I'm not dating anybody. I'm not going to make any new friends. I just want to travel. That was like my main goal. I really needed some time to consider what I was doing. This was a very big transition in life. I'm left my career to start something new, and it was a little scary, but I also wanted to find out more about who I was as an adult. So I had made the goal to travel to 10 different countries while I was living in London for about 4 months. And yeah, and luckily with the budget airlines like Ryanair and EasyJet, I could go places for, $20, $30 and see something for a long weekend and then come back and go to class. So that was actually what I spent my semester doing. And one of the first places I went was Denmark with my mom. We went to Aarhus and Copenhagen for just maybe about like 4 or 5 days. And when I was there, we went to the Danish Design Museum. And that was, at the time I was considering like I wanted to work in furniture. I already knew that because I had the experience of Falling Water. When I was at Sotheby's Institute, a lot of people were focusing on visual art, obviously, paintings and sculpture, working at the art auction houses and art galleries, but I wanted to forge a little bit of a different path because art is a luxury item, and I wanted to do something that's a little more functional, like furniture, and make an impact in your own home even if you don't have X amount of thousands to buy a real painting. So my mom and I went to Denmark. I really loved it and started looking around, noticing that that was the style that I was into. And then whenever my mom left, that's whenever I started focusing on the other 9 countries that I was going to visit. So Oslo came up because it was only $20 for Ryanair for me to fly from London to Oslo. So this was just something I was like, well, I Googled Norway. I loved it. It looked beautiful. And I thought, I'll give it a shot. So at this time, there's a thing that I've noticed with some European airlines that instead of bringing the plane directly to the gate, where then you enter right into the airport, sometimes they have the staircase that you go down onto the tarmac. And that is what happened actually in my Oslo flight, was that whenever we landed in Oslo, they had us walk out onto the tarmac and get into a shuttle bus and then took us to the airport. And that was actually another pivotal moment in my life because the second that I left the airplane and I was on the top step of the tarmac, like I remember this like it was a dream, but it was reality. It's just such a strong memory, but it feels like I've lived it a few times. Uh, that moment that I breathed, that I like had a breath of Norwegian air, was a solid like deja vu. Like I've been here, I have a history here. And I had never been in Norway before. But there was some intrinsic connection at that moment that I realized like I felt home. So when I was in Norway, I was just considering this the whole time. By the way, I now have Norwegian for home as a tattoo. So it has definitely impacted
Oh,
me in
cool.
many ways. Yeah, so whenever I, landed in Norway, I had that moment, and then I started
Mhm.
exploring Oslo. I went to Stavanger as well, which is a town on the west coast of Norway in the fjords. I learned about what fjords were, which are like these really natural, beautiful occurrence where you have these cliffs that drop off into like essentially like rivers and bodies of water that you can only
Mm.
find in Norway and in Chile. So I ended up just kind of falling in love with Norway, and then I visited Sweden, I visited Iceland, and then I visited, a few other countries while I was there because we only have 5 Scandi countries, but I visited them all except for Finland during this trip.
Hmm.
So when I first came back to New York, I had decided, yeah, I want to design my home as if it was in Denmark, and that I could have these Scandinavian items. And I started doing my Google search of where I can buy things. And in New York, there just was not a Scandinavian only store or something that catered to products from the Scandinavian countries that I could buy here. And that's what I wanted. I had purchased from IKEA many times. I still purchase from IKEA. And the Swedish design, they have that same aesthetic, but I wanted things that were a little bit better quality, or like that I was starting to become a real adult and invest in my home. But there was another facet to that as well, and the facet was that I know that the UN puts out their, list of the happiest people in the world year after year, and it's always the Danish, the Swedish, the Finnish. Like they are always the happiest people in the world, and I thought, why? What is what is the connection there? Half of the time of the year they spend, they have very minimal sunlight and they're still the happiest people in the world. So I felt like it had to be something about either their work-life balance or their home. And then I discovered the term hygge, which is all about, making your home into like this cozy sanctuary where you can rest, you can relax, you can also feel connected with nature. And so that definitely influenced my life from that point forward. And when I realized there was no Scandinavian store, that was just a little sprout that started in my head, when I first came
Mhm.
back from from the trip that I was, living in London. But then I had to work a few more years in the design industry to realize, actually, I can do this. I can open a store, and it could be me.
Before I did UrbanCred, there was a point of time where it wasn't like a few years, but it was definitely like like a year or so where there's a transitional period. And then I always tell people how mine started was there was like a point in time where a switch flipped, and then it was like, you know what, that I think right now is the right time to do it. It's similar to where it was brewing in my brain, the back of my brain, for a long period of time, even before, I stopped my previous business.
Yeah.
It was just there. It was, just something there that I was like, oh, there's something there, but maybe it could do. Maybe I could do it. Maybe I can't. I don't know if it's possible. And then one day for me it was just, oh, I'm feeling good today. I feel like I want to try.
Yeah.
I want to start. Was that something similar in your kind of experience with Teak?
So really what the pivotal moment was of working, or of like starting Teak and deciding to work for myself versus working for other people, is I had experienced in my last full-time job being unappreciated at work. And so I had gotten hired at a non-named company back in February 2020. And honestly, when I first started the job, I loved it. It was great.
Mm-hmm.
It was phenomenal. I was learning a lot. I was working in lighting, so I was learning a lot about just lighting in general and design. And I had an amazing boss who, to this day, like, I still send her appreciation notes, and probably will send her this podcast whenever we're done. But yeah, her name was Amelia, and she was just phenomenal. And she gave me kind of this structure of being like, you know what, I could have an amazing boss who actually appreciates me and listens to me. And, if I need a mental health day, she was always like, just take it. Like, she always enabled me to be my best self, to grow, to learn. And she knew that the position that she hired me for, I was going to do that. And unfortunately, at one point, she decided to leave the company, and had, then it was at that moment where I was like, okay, what am I going to do? But also at the same time, the company itself, and the reason why she left, it was crumbling around us. And so I wasn't getting any raises. I wasn't being like given a lot of opportunity that, like, when I first got hired and when I was working with her, we had this like kind of really cool working relationship where her and I were just like, we tag teamed everything. We got everything done, and like everything was successful, and it was all moving in a great direction. And I felt really fulfilled at work, and I felt like I was making an impact, but also learning a lot. And then when she left, I got a boss eventually who didn't like me. And ultimately, they eliminated my position, which you know what that means. So I essentially got fired, and my mom is going to be upset that I said that, because she always tells me not to tell people I got fired. But I mean, that's really what it was. They didn't want to work with me anymore. After 3 years, I was kind of making waves and pushing back in the company and being like, hey, I'm not being treated fairly, or like, I'm not getting what I want. And I've had, been working for a company for 3 years with no increase, and even asking for, increases. And we had a 9% inflation a couple of years. It's just like, I was just not being treated right. So that actually, when I got fired, was the moment where I was like, well, I had started Teak already and had been like kind of double dipping a little bit. I know. I mean, hey, but what can you do? Whenever you're working on a project, sometimes if you have nothing going on at work, you're going to then work on the project.
Exactly.
So at this point, I had already established Teak. I registered the name back in November of 2021. So that was like 2 years into my time at my last job. But I had not really launched Teak until March of 2022. So this was the opportunity I had to do a pop-up. So I did a pop-up in NoHo for actually a year, from March of 22 to February of 23. But I had my friend Bianca running the pop-up for me. So she was actually there taking care of the pop-up, running everything, like gauging customer interest, getting our name out there a little bit. So I had one employee and then I was working full time. So that way I could support buying inventory for us and paying Bianca's paycheck. So that way we always had like a solid income coming in. So, yeah, I think too though, like the me being let go was really a moment where I decided, okay, so I either need to now interview for other jobs and put Teak on the back burner continually, or I could throw everything I have at the wall and figure it out and see what happens. And that's ultimately how I found a decently priced storefront in Greenpoint, Brooklyn. And then I got the keys actually in May, and then we opened in June of 2023. So we've now had a brick and mortar open for the last 7 months. Yeah.
Cool. Wow. What a journey.
Yes.
Wow. That is crazy.
Yep.
All for the better. All for the better.
But in that mindset though, I've learned about what different workplaces look like. So I was, a teacher for a long time. And whenever you're a teacher, you don't really have a boss per se, like the principal, vice principals, but like that was something where I had a little more autonomy. And then moving into the design industry in New York, I was working for an e-commerce website. I was working for, a lighting company. I worked for a design fair for a while. So I had quite a few different experiences. Also, I was working in restaurants. I was a server at the same time. So I was in grad school, and whenever I was a teacher, I was constantly, trying to make that extra restaurant money here and there. So I've had a lot of different experiences, even was an Uber driver at one point whenever I was a teacher.
Wow.
So I've always been that type of person that was just a go-getter. I like to just jump into something and give it a shot. Which I think is the reason why Teak is where it is now, is that I just always like to take a risk. We have that saying that like, there's no reward without a risk. And so I just thought, hey, I'll give it a shot. I was kind of just using all my savings as my way to jumpstart this business. So I had no savings. I had nothing when I got let go. I just had a bunch of inventory that, we had in a small 60 square foot pop-up space. And I thought, well, if I need to liquidate this, at least I have something to show for. But yeah, it was all a big leap and risk. But by me being let go, it kind of forced me to decide, like, am I going to do this or not?
Right. And I feel like that sounds like a very, very difficult time, just because, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs go through that. Like, it's just either one or the other. You got to decide. And it sounds so easy right now because we're talking about hindsight, but it must be so difficult during that time where you got to be like, oh, do I basically stay alive, or do I like try this idea that that may or may not work?
Absolutely. And I definitely felt like that was March of 2023 was one of the hardest months I've ever had. Just in my adult life, we're not talking about like actual tragedies and things, but like
trauma.
Yes, it was like, it was the month where I really had to decide what I was going to be doing in the near and far future. But not only did I have to worry about myself, but also my friend Bianca was working, for me full time. So not only was I supporting myself, but I was supporting her. We were also living together at that moment. We had decided to move in together to focus on the business and to also just combine our incomes. So that way we could, have a little bit of a nicer apartment. That's a whole other story as well. But her and I were living together. But, I had an apartment that I had to pay rent for. I had an employee that I had to pay. I no longer had a salary coming in. So now I have to provide for myself as well. So like everything was on the line. At the same time, one of my friends passed away, one of my close friends in New York in February. So, I was also struggling with the grief of not only losing a friend, but losing my full-time job and security. And now thinking like I had spent all of my savings on starting this business. So now I don't even have a savings. There was no safety net in my, I had a safety net, of course. This is not that I don't have people to help me out, but like, my parents are middle class. We didn't really have access to like, oh, here's $20,000 for you to survive for the next couple of months. That just wasn't an option. And my company only paid me out for my 2 weeks of vacation. So that's all I had. And then unemployment, which,
Right.
unemployment in New York, it didn't cover my salary at that time or covering my rent, my employee's salary, my employee's rent. It was a lot. So
Right. Yeah. I mean, I wish. Right.
yeah, right?
Yeah.
It'd be like, hey,
Yeah.
if I could get that same salary, I would have been fine. There would have been no struggle. But whenever you can only
Right.
get $500 a week and living in New York, that was
Yeah.
my rent at the time,
Yeah.
was 2,000 a month. So
Yeah.
it was tough.
And I think like to put in perspective, I think um, for people who don't are listening to this not from New York,
Yeah.
it's very expensive to live in New York. It's just like everything is much more expensive compared to like other
Yeah.
places in the US, so that's why it's just anything that helps, but
Yes.
of course I feel like it's never enough, at least in New York City.
Yes.
uh, and I think everyone's position and during certain parts of their lives are different. So it's and I feel like during that, it's always like during those tough times where everything, like it's like the problems and the difficulties stack on top of each other. Like
Yes.
there's always like more than one issue that comes up.
Yeah.
It drives you crazy. Yeah. Wow. That's I hope when if your mom listens to this, she doesn't. What? She didn't tell me this. Oh, my poor baby.
No, my mom knows it all.
Oh,
That's
okay.
the thing
Okay.
about being an only child. Well, at least in my opinion, I'm very close with my
Hmm.
parents, and I tell them all the
Hmm.
time that like I'm building this business to take care of them, which is true. So
Right.
so they're fine, but my parents know a lot, and they've come to visit frequently. They came to like my launch party for my store and like are always supporting me. So that I'm very
Awesome.
lucky, and that's
Yeah.
one thing that I realize in my personal life. Like I'm super lucky to have supportive parents emotionally, mentally.
With the creation with Teak and the creation for UrbanCred myself, we're similar in a way where we curate products with like a strong design focus. Is has that always been like a challenge? Because I know for me, a lot of times there are brands or products that I think are great, they're cool,
Yeah.
but they don't necessarily fit with what we sell.
Yes.
So like I secretly want to like bring them in, but then I know that it's not going to work out. So, or sometimes I do bring them in just like, because entrepreneurs are very emotional, so they find reasons to kind of do that. Have you encountered that kind of situation?
Oh, absolutely. And that's the thing about businesses. I feel like whenever you are the curator,
Yeah.
it's like you are constantly deciding this. I mean, I
Yeah.
decide this on like a weekly basis, basically. And I have to, first of all, I will say having a level of parameters as a business owner is always great. So I get emails constantly, Instagram messages from all different types of people that are saying, hey, can you sell my stuff? Hey, can you
Hmm.
look at this? Like I have these furniture pieces and this furniture piece. But one thing that I love is being like, if it's not Scandinavian, I can't take it in.
Ah.
So I immediately am allowed to like push away a lot of the people that are trying to come to me for me to sell their products. So that
Hmm.
kind of helps a little bit to have that parameter of being like, unless you're from the five Scandi countries, I'm not going to bring it into teak. So that helped.
Gotcha. Okay.
But I've also gone through a lot of different products that I've tried. So I think too, it also depends on where you're selling. So
Hmm.
currently right now I have my store in Greenpoint and I have an e-commerce website.
Hmm.
But prior, when I had my pop up, it was like we had a 60 square foot pop up,
Mm.
which I have only 60 square feet. So, what am I going to do with that space? It's literally 10 by 6. So, that was it. We had 10 by 6 size, and every single foot matters.
Yeah.
Also, though, like you have to start thinking about price points too. So, like, what do your customers at that location want to pay price point wise? And where I
Mm.
had my pop up, it was very much like a lot of tourists. People didn't want to pay too much. I think my average order value at that time was $45.
Oh,
So I always
yeah.
had to keep that in mind. I was like, okay, people really don't want to spend more than $50 on something here. So I need to then think about that.
Yeah.
But then I have to think about, okay, but if I'm bringing quality items, which is craftsmanship and quality, it's not cheap, So I
Yeah.
have these like $10, $20 items next to really expensive items. And then that was always, something where I had to do a give and take, or I would bring in some products that I thought would work that didn't sell at all. So then we have to be like, okay, offload these. And then it's very tough, but even right now, so I'm actually gearing up to open a new store in the summertime. Yes.
Hey,
So I went from 60 square feet of my pop-up in basically all of 2022, into early 23. Then mid 23, I opened a 600 square foot store. And we're currently in transition to opening a 4,000 square foot store in Greenpoint.
very
Yes,
excited.
I know. And it's also very scary.
Oh,
It's
yeah, I
it's
can imagine.
exciting, but also I don't know, I question my reality every day. And so, think about the transitions and products that I've had to change between 60 to 600 to 4,000. What I'm looking at now and what I actually have on another tab on my computer is a wish list of brands that I want to bring in for my new location. So I'm even considering now again, okay, well, what brands do I want to expand? What items do I want to bring in? And then with those brands, you have to decide, well, they have 500 products. So
Mm,
which products am I going to bring in? Am I going to do the whole assortment? Am I going to do a very small amount? And that all comes into factoring as well. But one thing I do like to do, which is I think it's a good exercise, is I often like look at other people's brands, even if it's like clothing or, accessories, like something that's not even furniture related. I still look at furniture brands too, of course.
hmm
But seeing what their choices are and picking out items that I'm like, this maybe doesn't work for them. And I'm surprised that they brought that in.
hmm
So I do tend to like take a look at um, other small businesses in New York specifically, or like other small businesses in e-commerce. Like there's a few clothing brands that I really like to buy from that are very distinct and that like this is their style. These are the items they create. And then sometimes they show something that's a one-off that I'm like, I don't know if that really fits with like my vision of their brand. Maybe
hmm
it fits their vision, but like that is always something I'm considering. Or like for me, at least in this new space, do I want to include jewelry or do I want to include a new category of items? Like what's going to resonate with my customers?
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of points I want to take from your what you just mentioned, and I think we did a pop up in the city as well. We ran. It's so funny. We ran into the same exact issue, which is like mostly tourists. They didn't want to spend a lot, and then we had uh, to try to make it work where we had to bring in other stuff, the
Yep.
cheaper stuff, to kind of make ends meet,
Yep.
which is tough. And then so we were wondering. I think we're at a point where we're wondering maybe one, the spot's not good, and two, I think a bigger space would allow us to display more stuff, which
Yes.
would be better. So that's just interesting because people, I feel like Manhattan is for a lot of people the end goal for opening a shop. Like there's Soho, there's a ton of like boutique shops and like
Yep.
and then people are like, oh, if I could, had no restrictions, I want to open it up on like Elizabeth Street or something. But I think reality is like it's just mostly tourists. It's just
Yep.
like a lot of tourists, kind of just like us who don't want to spend too much money, and their suitcase only holds so much.
Yes.
So it's just interesting to see that from your perspective, how you encounter that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And tourists honestly don't like to buy furniture. So that's
Lugging
always,
it on the back.
yeah,
I'm coming home
exactly.
with the teddy.
Yes.
That's so
So
funny.
yeah, I mean, that's always important. And I think there's a lot of brands that I think lose sight of their vision
hmm
or they just follow trends, which I think is like, I'm not into trying to follow the trends just to make a quick dollar right now that will then inhibit me from becoming like scaling larger later or like inhibit me from staying true to myself
Mm,
because this brand is mine. Like it's my baby, it's my
yeah.
decision. And one thing that I think is the biggest compliment people make to me in person at the store is they always say like, wow, it's so well curated in here. I just love everything you've brought in. And that to me is like the highest compliment.
Oh man, absolutely.
Yeah. And I, hear it honestly, I'm probably on a weekly basis and I'm not just saying that to like brag, but it shocks me every single time. Because for me, these are just items that I saw that I thought, would resonate with other New Yorkers, but also things that I love. I don't
hmm
bring in a product unless I love it.
Yep.
Like I have to be like yes, this is a cool product. Yes, I would use this. Or if I had this style, I would decorate with this. Like sometimes things are maybe a little too colorful for my personal home. But if it comes in, a neutral, I'm going to buy it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's interesting though, because you have to curate your products for your customers. But to hear from their mouths, like, wow, I could buy everything in here. I love it so much. Like, I just want to design my home with everything that you have. It is a feeling of gratitude that I can't even explain, that
Yeah.
people say that stuff to me. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, and I definitely think like it's also one of the reasons, like one of the main reasons why we do what we do. Just like one of the perks, because Teak for you and UrbanCred for me is like an extension of ourselves, right? And
Yep.
for people to like it, it's just kind of like means that we're fashionable. No, it just means that
Validating. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So it's nice to be able to kind of be on the that end of
Yeah.
the appreciation and the compliments.
Yeah. We'll see.
How did Teak come along? How did the name come about?
Yes. So, as I mentioned, whenever I first came back to the US, and actually maybe I'll wait a second because my cat's food is happening here.
Oh,
There's
meow,
just some little snacks coming out of the
meow.
the feeder.
I'm just gonna assume that's a Scandinavian feeder.
It's not.
Oh, you heard it here. Not
What?
everything in her store.
I will say that I'm looking for Scandinavian pet items, but it's really hard to come by. There's just so many good US companies also for, like, I have 2 cats. So there's a lot of really great US companies that provide cat furniture and items. So I've looked, but I haven't found anything that I really love. And sometimes I just think, maybe it's not worth getting into that category, like, of cat furniture. So
Yeah.
as much as I want to.
It's funny. I've talked about the same in my head for UrbanCred as well. It's like, should we get into pets? Because they have a lot of cool products. I mean, on our end, because we don't have that restriction, but it's always like jumping into like a new category is like always a big step.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so now that the food is done. So Teak, the name, actually, it's kind of a funny, well, maybe it's not a funny thing. I don't know. It's it was hard to think. It's hard to know what to name your business. Like, whenever you're thinking about starting a name, like, pretty much every name has already been taken. So you now have to decide, first of all, like, what names are available in some aspect, but then also resonates true with your brand. It's funny because one of the first ideas I had of naming my brand was I wanted to name it Lotus and Lily. But because I have a water lily tattoo, I very much resonate with water lilies. I like the idea of rebirth, and that, water lilies come from this muddy pond water and become something beautiful. Like, you can leave past experiences that are negative and, grow from them. That's always been something of my, like, life philosophy. So I always wanted to incorporate water lilies somehow. But now there's no water lilies at all at Teak.
Okay.
Because that's just my own personal thing,
Right.
which you have to keep some things personal, I guess.
Yeah.
But I thought, oh, well, that's like kind of like a nice yin and yang. It's like masculine and feminine. But then I was like, this doesn't mean anything. Like, this is just something that I would name something. So I started actually just looking around my house. And at this point, I had already decided I loved Scandinavian stuff. I had been working full time. I had a salary, so I was able to start buying some pieces to invest in my home. So I started buying a lot of Danish vintage furniture, and most Danish furniture is like either in teak wood, rosewood, or like oak. There's a variety of woods that they use, but teak was a pretty prominent one. And I always just loved the grain and the color of the wood. So I started collecting vintage Danish teak furniture. Found that I just loved it. I still have quite a few pieces in my own home now. It's something that I incorporate. I love doing both vintage and contemporary pieces. So when I named the company, I started going into like a name generator online, and I just started like typing in different like parts of what I was going for with my brand. Like, I typed in Scandinavian, I typed in, craftsmanship, quality, wood, like different materials. And then it started coming up with material names. And I think it came up with walnut. And
Okay.
I was like, well, I don't want that, obviously. But I
Right.
said, why not my favorite wood, which is teak? So
Ah.
it was allowed me to kind of give a nod to Scandinavian furniture roots, which became very popular in the mid-century. That's whenever, of course, like Finn Jol, Carl Hansen, like a lot of the big names, Arne Jacobsen, were coming out. Scandinavian furniture was like a global thing during mid-century. People just loved it and ate it up. They loved the craftsmanship. They loved the style of the clean lines. And of course, that's what I was drawn to as well. So I started collecting it, and then I thought, well, that's the perfect name. So I called it Teak, but we had to, I can't just name it Teak because we're not Apple here. We can't just have like a single word
Uh-huh.
company because I founded it in 2021. So we just called it Teak New York. And I thought that this would also be a nice segue in the future. If I ever wanted to open up a different store, they would be Teak Boston, Teak Chicago, Teak Seattle,
Mm.
so that way I could expand on that level too. So we call the store Teak because that's
Mhm.
really just the name, but it's Teak New York as a full name for
Mhm.
our like home base.
Mm.
And also
Interesting.
the website and everything like that. You can't just have a four-letter word as a name. So yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's like in the beginning, you knew that it was had to do something with furniture. So, and like a lot of brands and companies are mainly focused online. So what kind of made you, what were like kind of the points where you're like, oh, okay, you know what? What made you decide, oh, I have to do retail? Like, what does that
Yeah.
look for you?
I think for me, at least, just being the age that I am. I grew up in the 90s going to the shopping malls. That was always important for me. Like, we didn't have online shopping growing up. If I wanted to buy new clothes for school, I had to go to American Eagle in the shopping mall to buy my
Mhm.
clothes and my jeans. So I had come from this mentality of there's two ways to shop. We either do it in person at the mall or we get a catalog and then I circle things in the catalog. Those are
Yeah.
my two ways of shopping growing
Right.
up.
Right.
And then, of course, with the, e-commerce online shopping, this is huge now.
Yeah.
But I also think that online stores lack a certain credibility,
Mhm.
at least in my opinion. I think that brick and mortar stores, you are showing like, hey, we're investing in a footprint. If you want to come and see us, come and talk to us, have a discussion, see our, feel the items, please come here. So it was always important for me to have a brick and mortar location because I wanted to connect with my customers.
Mhm.
Online, there's only so much you can do to connect.
Mhm.
And I try to be offline as much as I possibly can. That's just something that I also value, just being from Pennsylvania and growing up in the outdoors, is that I like to turn my phone off. I like to put my phone away as much as I possibly can in 2024.
Mhm.
So it's like my phone and my computer are my work. I don't really shop online. I will buy things for the store or like if I need, something like a one-off thing that I can't find because in New York, well, this is also the difference. When I was growing up, we had, major stores like Lowe's, Home Depot, Walmart, Target, things that you could go and get anything that you needed in one place.
Mhm.
But I feel like,
Sears. Yeah.
yeah, in New York, there's a lot of these small little businesses. So if I need a hammer and I also need like toilet paper and I need lettuce, I'm going to
Yeah.
be going to like two or three different locations to get these
Yeah.
items.
It's true.
So I do order a little bit online, but honestly, I'm very much against like I try to buy as much as I can in my own neighborhood, when I have the opportunity.
Mhm.
But I just felt like having a brick and mortar gave us a different level of credibility of us like building relationships and also hosting events.
Mhm.
That was something that I wanted to bring the community together. Like this past 6, 7 months now, we've probably had about 15 events. So that was something, for me, it's very educational. My goal of my company is not to make money. My goal in my company is to be educational about the Scandinavian lifestyle and promoting that, the hygge, which is that comfort level. I want people to come in and to feel the textures, to see the craftsmanship, to know that what you're taking home is as beautiful as the picture that you see online. And there's a lot of things that don't translate furniture wise online to in person, especially in size.
Mhm.
People, as we know, will order online and don't measure. So There's
No,
that. Yes. There's that issue. We actually just had this issue in store because my store manager bought a like kind of like a wired trash can essentially for you to hang the bags over. And when we got them from Amazon, she was like, "Oh, I didn't think they would be this small. They were really tiny."
Okay.
They were like for a tiny little trash can. And so then
Right.
I was like, "Well, there's that's what happens. Like we do
Right.
it all the time where we don't measure, we don't look at it."
Yeah.
And then, of course, whenever you're working in the furniture industry, you're working with interior designers and architects who want to see items in person.
Mm,
So that was always important for me. That I
mm,
just felt like growing up and shopping in person, I wanted to make sure that I could make an impact in person as well. And by investing the money in rent, in employees, in inventory, rather than just having a warehouse and I'm shipping, direct to consumer, it's
right.
just wasn't my style.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think it's very similar to me. Like I grew up with like I get like Lego magazines that I would circle. Oh, I want this, dad. I want this, dad. And he would obviously say no and say, "Oh, I'll be okay." That's another story though. But yeah, it's something about something physical where you can kind of interact with
Yes.
customers and kind of get feedback that way, and then for them to kind of touch and feel and cat, and then see just see the products up close. Because I think we sell mainly bags, and
Mhm.
it's very similar because you write how bags are measured like by liter size, and then but many people like liter, like 12 liters versus 25 liters. What does that even mean, in terms of like space and um, size? So
Yes.
it's much better for them to kind of come in and touch and feel and see how it is up close. Um, so I definitely see the purpose of that,
Yeah.
because it's interesting because a lot of people are always about, and I think it has to do with like social media and how people are pushing like, oh, drop shipping or like, just
Yep.
focus online. And but there's aside from like the benefits, there's a little bit of like a joy and actually a lot of pros to having a physical location. Um, and then I think that it's interesting because ever since doing the pop up, a lot of people are saying, "Oh, rent is so expensive in New York." It is, but it's
Yeah.
also like I've come to a realization that having employees are actually much more expensive than having dealing with
Yes.
the rent. So
Yes.
like, how did that decision come to pass? Because I know a lot of business people that I speak with their own business, a lot of them like show at the shop themselves, just to kind of curb some of the
Yep.
costs of that. But you have employees, and then you pay for their salaries, and you also have a partner that you also have to in a way take care of as well, and yourself at this point. So like that it must be, and then you're moving up to like a 4K square footage. It must be a lot of cost and a lot of stress. Like how do you
Yes.
handle that? How do you decide like, oh, we're gonna actually move up to a bigger space, and how does that decision making even work? Because I know a lot of people who are listening who aren't of business, who don't know the details. Like that sounds crazy.
Yes. It is crazy.
Okay.
So, I mean, I honestly feel that every day.
Okay.
Sometimes I question my decision making, but also it's about opportunity.
Right.
So, when we first, let me take it back to this summer, whenever we first were opening the store. So when I was running the pop-up before, I was the owner. I had Bianca working for me full time, and then I had another part-time employee, Nabiha, who I met at the pop-up, and she started working for me as well. So I had like the pop-up covered. I only needed one person there. I was paying rent. So it wasn't too much of a cost level. But I also thought if I took this rent and moved it into our own location, then I would have a lot more space. But the thing is, then you're taking on personal risk.
Yeah.
Like with the pop up, you can leave at any point in time. Someone else has their name on the lease. Like, that's easy.
Yeah.
When you're on a month to month basis, it's a little different. But whenever you sign a contract and then you're liable for that money, now I'm liable for, so many thousands of dollars over the next year. Luckily, though, I did get into a 1-year contract, which is very abnormal in commercial real estate. Usually, they want you to do a minimum of 5 to 10 to 15 years, which I did sign a 10-year lease at our new location. So again, you're taking on those risks as you move forward. But when we first opened our storefront in Greenpoint, the 600 square feet, it was just me, Bianca, and then I still had Nabiha part-time. So I still had that was my three core people that I've had the entire time of me having a physical location, because it just started out with me. Then whenever I opened the pop-up, then I added Bianca, then I added Nabiha. So it was just our 3-person team. And Bianca and I have completely built our entire storefront in Greenpoint. So her and I, like, she did YouTube drywalling, that's what we were doing, is like we were figuring out, okay, how do we open a storefront? What are our retail fixtures going to look like? What do we need to buy to get this open as soon as we can? Because every day mattered. Because I had nothing left. I had no money left. So every day that we were closed mattered. But luckily, once we opened, people started coming in, and the Greenpoint community was so like impactful for us. They welcomed us with open arms. Everyone wanted to come and see what we were doing. It was just a really great reception. So at this point, though, it was me, Bianca, and Nabiha working in the store only. But this is where the teddy sofa comes into play. So while we were opening up this new store, I had said to Bianca, because I always had her opinion on the things that I would bring in. It was always great to have a second pair of eyes to kind of filter through. If I would be like, okay, I love these 20 products, then I'd be like, what should we cut out? And then she would help me narrow it down a little bit. And I had said to her, the only thing we don't have for the store is a comfy couch. And when you speak it into existence around your phones, you're then given the couches that you were looking for online. Yeah. So we ended up stumbling upon, Bianca stumbled upon a vintage store that was located in Denmark. And it was these two guys, Jonas and Frederick, that were, picking up vintage furniture, refinishing them and reselling them. And they came across the teddy sofa from the 1970s and actually acquired one of these. But at this time, it wasn't the teddy sofa. It was just a 1970s sleeper sofa. Mm-hmm. And so at the same time, Bianca and I are figuring out things at Teak. These Jonas and Frederick are overseas, like deciding how can we manufacture this, and does anyone have a patent on it? So they ended up manufacturing the now teddy sofa. Mm-hmm. And of course have all of the copyright and patents, so no one can steal it from us. Thank you. Yeah. But we reached out to them because we saw the teddy then, because Bianca had seen their vintage stuff. We saw the teddy, and then we were like, this would actually be really cool for New York apartments. But in our mind, we thought, okay, we're just going to have one of these in store for people to sit on, and then maybe we'll sell a couple of them a month. That was like the intention. Like, I didn't think that it would be like our main product. Mm-hmm. So we reached out to them, told them, hey, we're two friends as well. You're two friends. Let's go into business together. We're happy to bring your sofa to the US, and then we can cater to your US customers. Gotcha. And so we decided to then go into a partnership. We brought the teddy into the store, and Omhu had already started drumming up a lot of, interest in the US market. So once we had it in store, immediately people started coming in to check it out. Oh. And then, of course, things have escalated to the point now where, we've had one video on Instagram, which is a major milestone with over 1 million views.
Wow. Congratulations.
Thank you. But yes, it's still, it's nerve-wracking because you don't actually want to go viral, because going viral is very detrimental to, I feel like, the store itself, because at this point we're a 3-person team. I have 2 full-time, me and Bianca, and 1 part-time. Eventually got to the point I said, Nabiha, I need you to be full-time, please. Come on, full-time. I need you. Right. Because we were just getting so much foot traffic into the store. But then that meant that all 3 of us were just catering to customer service and selling. Yeah. So at this point now, I can't even really do CEO duties of being let me work on this project, let me work on that project. But I saw that we had already filled our store to capacity with items, and that the demand was starting to rise. It was in our 2nd month, we had made more money than I had made in all of 2022.
Wow.
So, at this point, we have now transitioned. 2022, we were yes, we made 6 figures. And we were so psyched that we made 6 figures by the end of the year. So an entire year of Bianca and I sweating and crying and bleeding for the business. We made 6 figures and we were so happy. And now our first month of opening in Greenpoint, we've made six figures.
Wow.
Yes.
Congratulations. That's
So,
awesome.
but you can see why it was like, okay, once we established that brick and mortar, we weren't making online sales. The online sales came after this. This was just like us being in Greenpoint, and like I was walking to local businesses, introducing myself to everyone. I was talking to literally every person on the block. Anyone that walked nearby, I was like, hey, we just opened the store. Please pop in, just because we want people to have awareness. And that's whenever the ball just started rolling, because people would come in, they liked what we had. And then, there's also a lot of new apartments going up in Brooklyn, especially in Greenpoint. So we have new residents moving in that were looking for furniture.
Mm-hmm.
And there is overall a lack of furniture stores in New York, at
Mm-hmm.
least like unique ones. You can easily see West Elm, IKEA, Crate and Barrel, and all of the like in that group. But to have small business furniture stores is not that prevalent here as much as you would think it was.
Yeah.
So yeah, so the demand just continued. And at that moment I thought, wow, we're going to need more staff. Eventually we're going to need to move into a new location. So it took me like almost a year to find my current storefront in Greenpoint, the 600 square feet. I had been looking for a while to make sure the price was right, because we didn't have any money. So I needed to find something that was affordable to the point where it wouldn't completely knock me out, like financially, because I didn't have anything. Like,
You want
as much as I've said this now on the podcast, like seriously, in March and April of this past year, like we were so broke, it wasn't even funny. Like, it was to the point where I was lucky to even get a storefront, because they didn't ask me for my bank information,
Oh
like my
yeah.
financials.
Right.
If they would have said no, because we had nothing. But they
Right.
were like, oh yeah, this looks cool. You look like an established business, so we'll give you a shot. And like that moment too was the only reason why we're here today.
Right.
So once I saw that we filled up the store, the demand was there, we were actually making money, and then
Mm-hmm.
starting to now make online sales. That was something that just grew as well. And the Teddy sofa became a big hit. Once people started seeing it, they were interested, they were coming in. Then that was the moment I was like, okay, I got to start looking for another storefront, because this one's too small. So I really thought I was going to do a second location. And then at the time that I started looking, because I thought, oh, it's going to take me a year to find a
Right.
new storefront, this 4,000 square foot old zipper factory in Greenpoint was being renovated into a retail, or, into a commercial space of some kind.
Right.
So I put in I walked in and I was like, this is what I want. This is it. And I made a relationship with the building owners and told them, listen, I am a brand new business. I am a risky investment. You don't know where I'm going to be in who knows how many months' time. I don't even know where I'm going to be. And, but one of the owners of the new location, which is at 34 Norman Ave, that's going to be our new address in the future. In the summer, we'll be opening. But at 34 Norman, one of the guys came by secretly to my store and saw me moving furniture pieces, because that's just who I am. It's like, oh, if I buy a piece of furniture, I'm the one who's going to bring it into my store physically and like
Right.
move it with my own arms.
Right.
And he came by and was like, I see that you're moving furniture, so I can tell that you are, a go-getter and you're a true entrepreneur. And I like that. I like what I'm seeing. So let's give this a shot. So all of a sudden now I have a 4,000 square foot storefront that we are building from the ground up, and which is also a whole nother learning experience for me. But,
Gotcha.
it was like, I thought that it was going to take me longer to find the storefront, but it ended up being in the neighborhood, in the area that I wanted. It's going to be right next to the new Brooklyn brewery that's going to open next year. We're also near a few vintage stores, some furniture stores as well, like Dobbin Street Co-op, which was one that I really enjoyed. Like when I first moved to New York, I thought, oh, this is a cool store, like a vintage furniture. And as I mentioned, I love that mix of vintage and contemporary. So I want to be near other furniture stores and near other small businesses. And so then the location we also found is the New York Times put out an article a few months ago calling it the new Little Tokyo. Being in Greenpoint, which there's a style called Japandi, which is Scandinavian and Japanese, one of my favorite styles. And so I thought this is actually perfect as well, because we can kind of skew a little more Japandi. on the exterior and really fit in with the neighborhood.
Oh, that's
And
really cool.
yeah, so honestly, it was just the opportunity came up.
Hmm.
But my rent, of course, is a very different amount from the
Hmm.
small to the big location. It's like roughly 10 times what I'm paying
Oh,
now,
wow. Wow.
which
Yeah.
is very scary. It's a huge risk,
Yeah.
and but I again just think if I don't take the risk, what am I doing? Like should I just take the risk? The location is perfect, the size is perfect. We're not fully making the money we need to make in order to get there, but this, it's not going to open for a few months, so let's see what happens.
Hmm.
And now I'm in the position where I have 6 employees, myself not included, so me plus six. And, we're adding more on as the months go. And then we're going to need a lot more people once we open the 34 Norman location because we're going to have a lot more square footage. So even more salespeople. But that also makes me even more excited because I feel like now I can provide an even better workplace for many people.
Hmm.
Paying like one thing on like my mission at least is to make sure people are paid fairly, that people are treated well at work, that they're appreciated, they receive feedback. So, that's something for me that like I always wanted to be able to take care of people. That's just part of my personality. I'm very maternal. I like
Hmm.
to take care of especially cats, but, people and friends and family too.
Right.
And so I was excited at the possibility of being like, okay, I can create an actual work environment that people are excited to wake up and come to work because unfortunately we all have to work. That's the society that humans built. And I don't think we should spend 40 hours a week. Even if it is 40 hours, maybe it's less. Maybe I can promote that 4-day work week,
Hmm. Hmm.
mentality. But that's something that I actually get to explore with friends and employees that, get to benefit from this. So, yeah, I mean, it's a crazy leap. It's not something I expected to do, but whenever the opportunity arises, that's whenever you have to take it.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I think that I encountered some of those too. It's like it's always that decision. Like when you first start, and then as you keep going, there's always points in the journey where you're like, okay, it's a big risk, and I encountered too like, oh, should I take it? Is
Yep.
this really an opportunity? And then I think it's just it's sometimes I think my issue is like to be able to surround yourself with the right people, to be able to kind of give you like non-biased feedback, but also like feedback that's helpful.
Yep.
So I think that's also very important too. Now it's interesting that well, there's two things. One is that a lot of people go from online to physical, but it sounds like yours is like the reverse, where you went from
Yeah.
physical to online, which is kind of very interesting. Uh, and then another thing is that Bianca is your partner in crime right now. So it's interesting because it's also like, it's very unconventional because many people, like when I'm in school for business, a lot of people are like, oh, don't partner up with someone else. Don't partner with your friends. It's going to turn sour,
Yes.
bad things can happen. Like, was that like a concern when you found Bianca, or is that like, oh, we're besties?
Yes. I think that I do, of course, everyone knows you don't go into business with your friends.
Yeah.
However, this is what I've been doing the entire time that I've had Teak.
Right.
So, there have been pluses and minuses to everything. And I
Yeah.
feel like because Bianca and I are both in our mid 30s, it's something where we're like, okay, we know this is the reality. So we just need to make sure we communicate whenever we're feeling a certain type of way. And even honestly, even in the last year, we've had moments where we're like, we were scared to bring this up, but now that we did, we feel so much better, like that
Mm.
kind of thing. But it really is about communication. And I think whenever you have a lot of work experience and you're not just doing something like right out of college, like 22-year-olds, besties, doing something together, you're immature, you're not experienced yet. Whereas Bianca and I have both had a lot of experience with bad bosses or just work in general. Her and I have both worked a variety of jobs over our lives. And we knew that, if we were going to do something together, it's important that we are just open with each other. And then since then, I've actually hired a few other friends. And everyone just, we're all working towards the same goal. I always say that Teak is a team. Whenever you're working as a team versus as a family, it's a little bit different. I never really believed in that idea of like, oh, we're a family because we work together. No, families have like unconditional love, but also there's like issues there, or, you're like, you have to do stuff with families. Whereas a team, we're actively working together for the same goals. But, that a team is also, some people can leave, they can come back, they can join. Whereas like a family, I don't know, it's just a different dynamic. I really never believed in that family at work type of mentality, because I just think it's not always the most, I don't know, healthy. But I just think having a team is different, because then you're like, okay, this is our shared goal. And our shared goal is to make X amount of sales so that way we can make X amount of money. And then, you continue moving down that path. So Bianca and I have definitely had struggles where we've had to talk things out, but we ended up, moving in together while starting the business as well. We actually met because we both lived in two single studio apartments in a brownstone. And so we met as friends. We're friends for a year before she actually lost her job because the company she was working for closed their US location. So she needed somewhere to work. And I said, well, I'm opening this pop up. Why don't you just come work for me for a little bit? You can figure out what you want to do. She wasn't sure if she wanted to go back to work or go to school. And so that was kind of how it was born. And then eventually she's like, I'm not leaving. So, and I was like, okay, well, let's, then come with me to decide, make big decisions. And like, I can use your eye. She's a good stylist. She's a creative person. So that's kind of how we built it hand in hand. And to this day, it's really built on both of us having that foundation at my business. And I, credit her very highly of helping me become what I am today and what Teak is today as well. And even with Nabiha, like I like hiring creative people just so that way I have a lot of that kind of, I don't hire people based on their experience necessarily. It's more about like their drive, their goals, their personality. And, a lot of my employees are artists, they're musicians, they're creatives in different facets. So I don't know if that answered the question, but I find that working with friends in business is not always a bad thing, but you really do have to consider the people that you work with. I have had some friends that I hired and it didn't work out, and now we're no longer friends. So that is the risk that you take, is that you do grow apart if it ends up not working out in a business facet.
Main focus is when working with people is just like maturity, but as well as like communication. I think it's I mean, it seems like it's really important to be transparent with your team. And I think like going back to like team and family, it's like team, there's like a level of professionalism,
Yes.
whereas family is it sounds a little bit too laid back, a little bit too familiar. But yeah, I think that it's if going into business with friends or family, there needs to be like a level of communication, a level of like rules set to be like, hey, when we have an issue or when we have a debate or a conflict of interest or a conflict in decision making, then we can kind of talk it out and then kind of figure it out from there. So it's interesting to see partnership with friends work compared to like everything on the internet saying don't do it.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think, like you said too, I do a lot of things backwards, like having the retail storefront or like the pop-up physical first,
Right.
versus doing e-commerce. But also I think, whenever you are starting an e-commerce website now, there's so much competition out there. There's so many websites. This is not like AOL.com anymore, like where we were on like, I was like, there's only so many websites you can go to. You can't buy
Right.
things then. But, and I just thought, well, I wanted to get my products in front of people to start getting, not only emails and contacts, but then people could start getting that brand recognition, which I think is much easier to do in person rather than online. Because online, again, there's no trust then. People don't know. Like I still have people that email and say like, are you guys a real company?
Oh my God, me too.
I'm like, yes, we have a storefront, like that's the easiest way for me to say, yes, we have a storefront. So of course we're a real company. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And I think I was gonna lead to another question, but I think so this is a really fun interview actually. I really enjoyed it. So then to come first full circle then, what I feel like this is maybe what kind of advice would you give if someone wanted to kind of start something? And I know the advice that you're going to give is backwards, but I'm
Yes.
welcome. I welcome it.
But hey, I mean, backwards, we can see it does work in some
Yeah,
facets,
yeah,
you know?
yeah, yeah.
I mean, and you know what? We had been talking while we were off of the podcast of talking
Hmm.
about like pros and cons of being, a business owner. And I think this kind of goes along with that is like one of the best things, in my opinion, about being a business owner is being able to create my own schedule, not
Mm.
having to have someone to, follow up on my projects and my business. And, there's a lot of freedom whenever you're a business owner in that way. But then there's also not a lot of freedom because I have to constantly be available whenever my store is open. I have employees that have questions. Like if I take a day off or, I'm doing something else, I still need to be available just in case something goes on.
Hmm.
So you're almost never off, like at least mentally, in my opinion. I'm never off. I'm always thinking about Teak. I'm always thinking about, how are my employees feeling? What are my products? Which ones should I get rid of? Which ones should I add? That's always a thought that's going on in my head, or like what hasn't been selling. There's always work to do.
Hmm.
The work never ends. So you do have to decide, this work life balance. And something that I'm still working on is trying to figure out how much of my time am I spending on Teak and how much am I spending on me.
Hmm.
So my goal for 2024 is to spend a little more time on me personally, but like I feel like I've also lost a lot of my hobbies because I'm running my own business, which ends up becoming my
Your
job,
hobby,
my
kind
life,
of.
my hobby,
Yeah,
everything.
yeah.
Yes. So I think like as a word of advice, it's like consider to make time for yourself. That's really hard for me to do in general, just because I know the more that I do, the more successful the business will be. But also, I need to maintain who I am as a person. I need to make sure I have hobbies and interests that are outside of furniture, which is hard because I love furniture. So
Yeah.
it's tough. But I do think not everyone is cut out to be an entrepreneur, and I feel like I've met a lot of people in the last few years that they think they want to be a business owner and they think they want to be an entrepreneur, but they maybe just don't have the drive or like the time management skills in order to do it. And the stress levels are very high
Hmm.
because not only now am I taking care of myself, but I'm taking care of 6 other people. And
Right.
that's something I think about every day is,
Hmm.
you know, 6 people plus more in the future are relying on me to provide for their livelihoods in New York City.
Hmm.
These are not people that I'm just employing online, to work remotely from wherever. So it's something that I consider every day is like whenever I have employees, I want to make sure that not only am I happy, but they're happy too.
Gotcha. Right.
So yeah, I would say like, my advice is to make sure you make time for yourself. It's easier said than done. And yeah, I think like I love the idea of being able to provide for other people. That makes me happy. It's almost similar to whenever I was a high school teacher. I loved being a mentor to my students. Like my students would come to me with personal issues and we would talk things out. I'd be like, okay, let's sit down. How do you feel about this? Like what can we do to move forward? Or do you just want me to listen or do you want advice? That was always something for me that was important. And I do the same thing with my employees and they do the same thing with me back.
Hmm.
Like my employees keep me in check as well. So my new ones that I just hired, I just had a few new people that I added, and it's like we have a great team. And I'm so appreciative of them because they're always like, when are you eating? When are you taking care of yourself? And, do you need to go take a walk around the block? Like they keep me in check as well. So,
Mm.
but I think it's difficult when you open your own business because that is everything. That I can always be on Instagram doing something. I can always be on my email. I can always be researching something new. And like, what about payroll? What about HR? What about finances, my bookkeeping? Like all of these things, marketing falls on my shoulders until I have the capacity to hire someone to do it for me.
Hmm.
So I've learned a lot, even just opening the new store. I've learned a lot about electrical, HVAC, plumbing, concrete pouring, like
Oof.
all of
Yeah.
that have sprinklers. This is the stuff that I'm dealing with now in
Yeah.
opening a new store that I never had experience with before.
Right.
So
Wow.
yeah, there's a lot of advice. I mean, I will also say, if anybody ever wants to have a little chat, I'm always down to chit chat at the store, or if anybody wants any entrepreneur advice, email or coming in person is always fine too. I like to just help other people.
Nice. Great. No, that's very helpful. That's a bundle of advice right there.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So we're reaching the end of this podcast, even though I don't want to. I actually have our conversation sprouted so many other topics that I wanted to talk about. So maybe another episode.
Yes.
But if people wanted to find you, where should they look?
Yes. So first of all, my storefront is at 42 West Street in Greenpoint, Brooklyn. So that one is always the, best place to find us, because then you'll actually get to meet us in person, which is great. So if you're a local New Yorker, always good to come by. And then of course this summer we'll be opening up our new storefront. So I'm hoping for anywhere between June to August for our 34 Norman opening. And in order to find more information on that, you can follow us on Instagram, which is at Teak New York, all spelled out. So it's TeakNewyork. And our website is teaknewyork.com. Facebook, TikTok, all the same stuff. So I have Teak New York solidified on all fronts.
Nice.
Yes. And then if anyone wants to reach out via email, it's just hello@teaknewyork.com.
Awesome. Yeah. And then we'll definitely link those links in the description as well for you guys to always reference back to if you need to. And then again, thank you to Cait, and thank you guys for listening and tuning into this super special episode, for me at least, at UrbanCred podcast. We hope you enjoyed our conversation with Cait and talking about herself as well as Teak New York, and just exploring just how her brain ticks and how the business works. Again, from another point of view. Again, if you found this episode as fascinating as I did, be sure to hit the subscribe to UrbanCred podcast, and then also keep up with us on our YouTube channel, also at UrbanCred, and stay updated with our latest episodes and such. So thank you again, Cait, for coming on, and then I actually really hope we can do another episode with more topics to talk about.
Let's do it. Thank you everyone for listening as well.
All right. Okay, guys. Until next time, we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.